Charles Byrne was born in 1761 in Tyrone, Ireland. His family background was normal, with nothing of note, which does nothing to explain his prodigious height of 7'7". One explanation offered by locals was that he was conceived atop a haystack, which appears to be a strange local legend. He actually had a rare mutation in his AIP gene, which is involved in pituitary tumors that gave him acromegaly. At the time, such things simply weren't understood. He eventually left his hometown of Tyrone in search of fame and fortune overseas, landing in Scotland, and began making his way south to the big city lights of London. He quickly made a name for himself between his cheerful demeanour and performing tricks like lighting his pipe from the streetlights. He reached London in 1781 at the age of 21. While there, he held live shows in Charing Cross, Piccadilly, and Spring Garden Gate, and inspired a play called The Harlequin Teague or The Giant's Causeway, named for the natural heritage site in Northern Ireland. He was rarely out of the papers, with some describing him as the wonderful Irish giant, the most extraordinary curiosity ever known or ever heard of in history. And the curious in all countries where he has been shewn pronounce him to be the finest display of human nature they ever saw. He even got a shout out in Charles Dickens' David Copperfield to draw a comparison with the size of an umbrella. When I relieved her of the umbrella, which would have been an inconvenient one for the Irish giant, she wrung her little hands in such an afflicted manner that I rather inclined towards her. He also made friends with two other Irish giants, the Knipe twins, who clocked in at 7'2" and are noted as the tallest identical twins in history. All of this occurred in his first year of London. He was, by all accounts, a sweet-tempered gentleman who never caused any harm to anyone. And you can probably guess that this story doesn't have a happy ending. Today, body displays are an occasional curiosity with shows like Body Worlds and TV shows like Embarrassing Bodies. While you may think these are new things, they've always been around, with greater or lesser popularity. In the 18th century, skeleton displays were a hip and trendy thing. There was a 1716 ad for The Moving Skeleton, a public attraction which, by a mechanical projection, performs several very strange and surprising actions, groans like a dying person, smokes a pipe of tobacco, and blows the candle out, as naturally as if alive. Anatomists at the time were very secretive about their methods, with few notes on how to get a body existing. Noted anatomist William Hunter told his students they should acquire a skeleton for personal use, but never published his notes explaining how to get a skeleton for personal use. There are notes taken by students, but those are sealed away in archives. Officially, students and anatomists were only allowed to use condemned criminals, but there just weren't enough condemned criminals to go around. Students and professors would have most likely used resurrection men like Burke and Hare to rob graves. However, we do have details on how William flayed his corpses. His brother John, who enters our stories later, would probably have used the same method. If you want the bones to be white, inject by the aorta for 2 or 3 hours, which will return by the veins. Then expose them to maggots. There is no record of what exactly was to be injected. In 1783, by the age of 22, Charles was in very poor health, most likely due to his acromegaly. Acromegaly can cause excessive sweating, fatigue, headaches, sleep apnea, joint pain, vision issues, impotence in men, and menstruation issues in women. In and of itself, acromegaly does not kill you, but it causes things that could. Compounding these problems, he was robbed, with the thieves making off with his entire life savings. He died within months of this robbery, destitute in his lodgings. Gone were the bright lights and the stage. All he had left in the end was a rented bed. And of course, the story only gets worse. John Hunter, brother of the earlier William Hunter, and noted for his museum of unusual specimens, made no secret of his wish to possess Byrne's body, and offered Byrne a princely sum in the event of his death. Byrne lived in terror of his body being dissected and studied for 2 reasons. The first, and a perfectly understandable reason, was that he simply didn't want his body to be carved up and put on display. The other reason was that dissection, as noted earlier, was only officially allowed in the case of condemned criminals. If your body and bones were put on display, you were assumed officially to have been a condemned criminal. there was very little in the way of enforcement or investigation. And Charles, understandably, did not wish to be seen throughout history in the same light as a condemned criminal. Byrne declined the offer and made it clear to his friends that he had no wish to be carved up and put on display. He requested his body be sealed in a lead casket and buried at sea, far away from prying eyes and grabbing hands. It's a simple request. He had no wish to be treated like a condemned criminal simply for being really, really tall. He was betrayed. At some point after his death, Hunter took possession of Byrne's body, flayed it, and placed it in his museum. 3 years later, in 1786, Hunter was appointed Deputy Surgeon to the British Army, and in March 1790, he was made Surgeon General by Prime Minister William Pitt. He died in 1793 after a heart attack caused by an argument at St. George's Hospital. Charles Byrne's skeleton was later purchased by the Royal College of Surgeons and was placed on display for nearly 200 years in the Hunterian Museum. The museum has been closed since 2016 for repairs, but is planned to reopen in 2021. After much controversy, what should be done with the skeleton remains a source of great debate. A survey that ran between December 2011 and January 2012 asked, should the skeleton of the Irish giant be buried at sea? 55% voted to respect his wishes and bury him at sea. 31% voted for things to remain as they were, and 13% voted to remove him from display but continue research on the skeleton. I will admit, I'm not a doctor, but I do wonder what is left to be discovered that hasn't been discovered in 200 years. It is quite possible there is stuff left to be learned from his body that I simply don't know about. If there is, please let me know, because I truly have no idea. Two major proponents of respecting Byrne's wishes are Dr. Thomas Muenzer, a law lecturer who believes the continued display of the skeleton is unethical, and Len Doyle, Emeritus Professor of Medical Ethics at Queen Mary University of London. The debate continued in the International Journal of Culture and Property Law, which argued his return, again on ethical grounds. The Board of Trustees of the museum are currently debating on what to do when it reopens in 2021. There are very few publicly calling for the skeleton to be retained. We have no idea what's being said behind closed doors. Maybe in the face of public opinion, they will finally respect his dying wishes. Or maybe they will retain the skeleton. It's impossible to say. As a side note, I have seen the skeleton years ago. I was just a kid. I had no idea of his backstory or what happened between his death and burial. It wasn't mentioned in the tour. Maybe the guy didn't think it was important enough to mention. Or maybe he simply didn't know the full story. When John Hunter stole Charles Byrne's body, he was not interested in what could be learned. He didn't care about acromegaly or forensic sciences. He carved off his flesh and put him on display in a museum. He didn't give a damn what Charles Byrne wanted. He stole the corpse, treated him like a condemned criminal, and stuck him as a freak show for people to gape at for centuries. The dead have names. Remember them.